This conference is now being recorded.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the New York ASBO webinar, Employment Records. My name is Matthew Darius. I'm the Senior Staff Associate for Professional Development here at ASBO, and I'll be moderating your webinar today. Your speakers for today's program are Mark LaFountain and Rebecca Streep. Operator assistance is available at any time during this conference by pressing £0. A Q&A session will follow this presentation. You may send chat questions at any time during the presentation using the chat window indicated by a speech bubble icon located to the right of the presentation. I'll now turn the call over to our first speaker, Rebecca. Please begin at any time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for attending the webinar. We have attempted, as you can see, the focus of the webinar is employment records, which is not a very exciting topic, but it's an important one because in the personnel function, we are generally buried in paperwork. So that's why we've indicated we have 2 hours and too many stories in terms of paperwork and information that we want to try to provide you with. If at any time you have any questions, as they said, you can put it on the message board and we will try to answer them as they come up. We will also have a period for question and answer at the end of the presentation. So to start out, we have some assumptions that are the basis of this presentation. And when we talk about the size of the district with respect to the personnel function, the reason that size matters is that many of the larger districts have personnel directors who are responsible for all the personnel functions in a district. Many of the smaller districts do not have a personnel director. It's the superintendent and it's you folks as business officials and administrators, and you are often responsible for the non-instructional end of the organization with respect to personnel matters. So we're going to concentrate on that classified end or the non-instructional aspect of the organization. We will touch a little bit on the instructional side of the organization, but mostly focus on the non-instructional. And when we talk about the personnel function, the major assumption that hiring the right employees is the most important function that you have as an administrator. We lost the signal. And so hiring the right person for the right seat in the organization is vital. And we're going to talk about the process and the records that you need to collect for doing that. So we're going to, when talking about records, we're going to be talking about records that cover the complete work life of an employee, from the beginning of the recruitment and hiring process, then during the active employment of an employee, the records necessary at the end of an employee's employment with the district, and the records retention after employment, because there is an obligation for the district to retain records after an employee has left your employ. There are both external records and internal records. The external records are those things that the district is obligated to report to such agencies as Civil Service or the IRS or the State Education Department when we're talking about instructional staff or teaching assistants, those employees that are covered by state ed. The internal records are the records that you need to maintain within the district for purposes of just being able to verify employment or have a history and a record of someone's employment throughout the district. So the types of records we're going to talk about are the applications and the hiring records, appointment records, any leaves of absence and evaluation records, and of course any other employment records that occur during the course of an employee's employment with the district. just generally, we'd like to make note of the fact that when we talk about civil service, most people believe that the only civil service employees in the district are those of the classified or non-instructional group. But the reality is that all employees that are hired or employed with a school district fall under the auspices of civil service. And there are two different elements of civil service. There's the classified side of civil service, which encompasses your non-instructional staff. And the classified civil service is then further broken down by different types of positions. The competitive class position are those positions for which there is a test that qualifies people for some of the non-instructional positions, such as clerical titles, typist 1 and 2, school secretaries are competitive class positions. Also, some of the higher level, more supervisory custodial positions, like a custodian 1, 2, or 3, are competitive class. And with competitive class positions, districts are required to hire from a list of mandated eligibles of people who have taken and passed the test. The other three areas of the classified service, the non-competitive and labor class and exempt class, there is no test required for their employment, and there are minimum qualifications, but you can hire after having done a posting and recruited candidates, and as long as they meet the minimum qualifications, civil service will approve their appointment. The exempt class are a limited class of people. Those are people such as the secretary to the superintendent, for which there, again, is no test. The unclassified side of the civil service is the instructional aspect of the organization, and they're the people that are covered by the state education department, your teachers, your teaching assistants, and your administrators.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark LaFountain, and as Becky said, one of the main points of our afternoon is we're really going to be focusing on the support staff represented by the classified, which is typically known as your civil service. One of the things I would recommend to any of you, if you have not already done so, would be certainly to obtain a copy of your civil service manual for the appointing authority. This is something that you'll really want to get intimate with, not so much as the point that you want to memorize everything that's in there, but you certainly will want to be familiar with everything that's in there, because it does cover everything from discipline hearings to actually of all the appointments that would be in a school district. So if you haven't secured a copy of that, you certainly should do so very soon.
And it's important to note that each county will have a little bit different system. So what Onondaga County may have in terms of rules and regulations may be different from Cortland County or Oswego County. So it's important to secure those rules and regulations that are specific to the county that your school district is, where your school district is located.
That's very important, Becky, and also especially if you are BOCES and you're dealing with multiple counties, you may have to be familiar with several civil service departments as well as just one. Well, we finally got there, and we need to hire somebody. And basically what is going to happen is you're going to have to assess the need for a position. And it will be, is it to replace a position that was vacated through attrition or somebody leaving, or is it going to be a position that you've decided that you really need and it's going to be newly created? If you're going to assess the position, as you can see, there's a form here used by the OCM BOCES that you may want to familiarize yourself with if you don't already have one, and it's actually putting down the title of the position that's vacated or the one that you want to create, and go through and actually identify, what department is it going to be? Is it going to be a 10-month, 11-month, 12-month? Is it going to be a budgeted position, or is it going to be a new one? An explanation for the need. And again, even in these tough economic times, even if it is a position that somebody just left, say a senior typist, you're still going to want to review and explain, do we need to replace that position? And if so, this would be the proper format to do that. I know at our BOCES we have found that very helpful over the past couple of years as we've been navigating these tough waters of economic times. If it is not a present position that you're going to do, it's going to be a civil service position. And before you fill out a new duty statement, one of the things that you're going to do, because now you're already intimate with the appointing authority manual, you will go to the back, and in the back they have listed out all the competitive, non-competitive, labor class and exempt class positions that are for a school district. And you can review all those to see if there is a job that is already titled by the Civil Service Department. If not, then it will be your job to complete a new job duty statement. And again, as Becky said, all the civil service departments are a little bit different. There's a lot of commonalities. This just happens to be a form that you would use for a new position that is not already titled in your manual. And what you would have to do is you have to break down up to 100%, and that 100% is key, of all the functions and duties of this new position. And at the end, you're going to double check to make sure that it totals 100%. You will then send that to your local civil service, and they either locally will determine if that is a position that they will give a title to, or if not, if they're really not sure, then they will pass it up to the state level, and they will decide. Now, I can say that, over the years that I've been in the HR office, we've had maybe a handful of new positions, and I know our civil service has been very generous. We work with them, and we've had the titles that we've wanted approved. So I guess one thing I would say, too, along getting intimate with your manual, get to know your HR person at the civil service office that you'll be dealing with, because many times they will even be helpful in creating the positions and navigating through the system, because there are going to be times when you're really going to need them to get the position you want, and if you're up front with them and establish a good working relationship, the fruits that you will benefit from at the end from working with them will be very good. And again, we're talking about records, so once this is approved, this is going to be something that you're going to want to keep in your job descriptions. Remember, civil service keeps all the official records for civil service employees, but it's also extremely important that you keep your own, and usually a couple times a year reconcile your records with civil service. Becky, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you are developing a new position and you have to fill out this new position duty statement, you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. Civil service has job specifications for all the titles in school districts, and if you think that the position would fall within a title, I would go to their website, pull off the job specification, and you can work from there when you list the duties that you need. And as you notice in the left-hand column, it says percentage of time. As Mark indicated, if it's a full-time position, you have to come up with 100% of the duties and responsibilities, but you have to break down each duty and responsibility as a percentage of the full-time equivalent. So work from the job specification rather than reinventing the wheel, because that'll help you define the duties and responsibilities as well as the skills and knowledge in the second part of that form.
Okay, so just to recap, you now know that you need a position, so you've done the assessment for the need for the position, whether it's the replacement of the existing one or the creation of a new one, with the job duty statement that we just had in the previous slide, and again, the civil service position roster. So once you've had those, you are now ready to move on to recruitment. As Becky indicated in the opening, this is going to be one of the most important functions that you will have in your role of personnel that you are doing as a business official, because hiring the right person once is a lot easier than hiring the wrong person for the first time and trying to navigate the waters to remove that individual. So some of the areas that we will be covering in the next few slides are going to be the posting requirements, the candidates, the applications, and the reference checks. Recruitment. Becky did cover some of these earlier when she was talking about the unclassified versus the classified. But one of the most important things to emphasize when you are looking at a civil service position, especially when you have a title that's competitive, such as Becky said, a senior typist, a clerk, a custodian, and just to name a few, is that these people must take and pass a civil service exam. And I don't recall off the top of my head if it's 70 or 75. I believe it's 75%. And civil service will establish a list of eligibles. That means the people will apply for the position. They will meet the quals, and they will take a test and be on a list. Now, you may decide that you have a position available, and you contact civil service, and you say, I have a need for a vacancy to fill for a competitive position as senior typist. Do you have a current list? And depending on the size of your county, you may very well. So being the good personnel person you are, as you go to your building principal and you say, well, here is the list of 3 senior typists. And the principal will say, well, I've grown up in this community my whole life, and I know all 3 of those, and they're slugs, and I don't want them. Well, unfortunately, when it's a civil service position, we don't have the luxury to pick and choose. We do have to take one of the 3 that are on the list. Now, after you've been at this for a while, you can get kind of masterful at learning to break the list legally, not illegally, because if you have only a list of 3 and you can talk somebody into not accepting the position, now you would have a list of 2, and a list of 2 is not a valid list. And then you can go out and hire somebody else. We can talk about that later. So make sure you have the list, and then go from there. The next
I would also just interject as well. When you're recruiting for a competitive class position, you're going to have to canvass that list of mandated eligibles. Those are also records that I would recommend that you maintain that list of people that you canvassed and their responses, because some people will accept in interviews, some people will decline it. And we have had situations where applicants have gone to civil service and protested the hiring of somebody because they indicated that they were not offered, for instance, they were not offered an interview. Well, as long as you keep those records, we've gone back to be able to show that that person was not offered an interview because they declined the position. And so you need to maintain those records if there's any question about the hiring practice. So who you've canvassed, all the responses that came back, and then who you've interviewed. Those records are important to keep in the event that there's any discrepancy or anybody files a protest with civil service about the hiring of that position.
Very good point. And, one of the things is Becky works in Onondaga County, which is a very large county. I'm from Oswego County, which is relatively small in size compared to Onondaga. So I do have the luxury of where my civil service agency will do all of the canvassing for us, which does make it very nice. But as Becky said, one of the things that, if you have somebody that, they canvass and they give you a list of 3 people, and you call up Sarah Jones for an interview and she says, I'm declining the interview, whether you use a form that's put together by civil service or you create your own, make sure that you send it to them saying that they're declining position, and then maintain that records for future use, because there are things that do come back and haunt you when you least expect it, and you don't want to be in that position, especially if you already have an individual in that position and you have to go through the process to remove them. The next one that Becky spoke about earlier was non-competitive, and as she indicated, this could be a bus driver, a maintenance mechanic, or a registered school nurse. Non-competitive, as Becky indicated earlier, this is really a position that you don't test for. The skill sets are something they've acquired through a trade, and it's just very hard to give a pencil and paper test for. So you would there would be no test and no list, and you would have the authority as the appointing authority, the local school district, to go out, advertise, and hire who you want. Still a civil service position as long as they meet the minimum quals, because you're still going to have to go from the job qualifications that were set up through you and civil service, either for the position or prior. And one of the things, though, to remember is whether it's competitive or non-competitive or a couple of the other classes that we are going to talk about in a few minutes, there always is a probationary period. Now, this will vary from county to county. For example, in Oswego County, the probationary period is 26 weeks. In Onondaga County, it is 52 weeks. But you would use that time just like you would if you were hired in a probationary appointment of a teacher, except obviously your time is much more condensed. So make sure that again, that appointment would be a probationary. I do want to back up though to competitive. Say there was not a list, and then you had the luxury to advertise based on the quals and hire who you wanted to hire. That person at some point in time will still have to take a test. So at that time, they will be appointed as a provisional employee, because when the time comes, and sometimes it can be 6 months to a year when civil service gives that test, that individual will have to take and pass the test. In addition to passing the test, have to be score high enough so that they're reachable in that list of 3.
And as long as went back to competitive, Mark, we did get a question asking if someone declines the position, don't you need that in writing from the candidate? And the answer is yes. There is a form that goes out with the canvas letter, and each person has to send it back, and they have a deadline, a date by which they have to get the letter back to you indicating that they're accepting an interview or they're declining the position with a reason. And if that declination comes in after the deadline, you don't have to consider them for the position. But that's a good question. You do need it in writing, and those are the records that you should keep in the event that there is any dispute with respect to the hiring of that position.
Okay, thank you, Becky. The next class for civil service would be the exempt class. Again, there is no test or list for this. It includes the positions for which competitive or non-competitive examinations or other qualification requirements are not practical. And just a few, again, would be the treasurer for the school district and the secretary to the superintendent. And finally, you would have the labor class, which are considered your unskilled employees, not to be punitive to the title, but it's just an unskilled position that you don't have to test for, and it's neither exempt or non-competitive. Typically, your custodial worker, your food service worker, and your property guard. And again, remember, it doesn't matter if it's exempt, labor class, non-competitive, or competitive. You still have that probationary period that you can work with if things are not working out. Posting requirements. One of the things that you need to do is if you say, well, gee, okay, I know I've got the list of eligibles, I know I have the roster, I'm all set to go, and you take off out of the box to fill the opening, and about 2 weeks later, Mr. and Mrs. Union President knock on your door and say, gee, Mark, I know she just filled the senior typist position, but we're going to challenge that because we have somebody else that's interested. And I'll say, well, what did you mean? Well, what I'm referring to is the first thing you want to do once you've determined that you're going to fill a position is to, read over your collective bargaining agreements and make sure that if there are any requirements for internal postings prior to selection of candidates that you adhere to those. Typically, they're like a 5-day internal. Obviously, they will vary because these are usually conditions of bargaining when you're negotiating. And as long as you do that, then you'll be fine. But again, you don't want to go through all of the legwork, and it's time-consuming, it's tedious, and then be caught on a small technicality because you didn't even think to look over the collective bargaining unit.
And we maintain all those postings as well, just in case anybody in a building says that it never got posted in my building. You can we maintain those postings to show when it was posted and for how long, and we keep that on file just in the event that somebody says they didn't see it.
Good, yeah. And, and with the electronic age, it's very easy to store all that information without having to have boxes and boxes. But you will be surprised, even if you met the posting deadline, if it was in the contract, and then, 6 months, a year later, someone comes up and questions about something either you're doing or not doing because it was or was not covered in the postings. Again, the importance of keeping these records. And at the end of the presentation, we'll direct you to a website that actually breaks down what you have to keep and for how long. So now we get to the point we're going to have the posting. And, is it classified or unclassified? So let's take a look at a classified posting. Remember, again, a classified posting is going to be something that's going to be covered under the civil service. And this is one that is used here at the OCM BOCES for the position of custodian. It has the notice, it has the hours, it has, the department is facilities, the location, a general description of the duties, the qualifications, the salary range, the start date, and the closing date. And again, you create these things, you own them, and sometimes we get hurried and we fill the position before the closing date. And all of a sudden says, well, how could you fill that? Because the closing date was the 23rd and you filled it on the 21st. And yes, I have done that, but luckily no one has ever challenged it. Just sometimes the information goes in, you get processed in it, and you forget the little details. But as I always say, it's the little details that sometimes will hang you up more than the big ones. So again, please pay attention to what you put in those postings. An eye for detail is important.
We also got a question mark about how long do you opt to keep your internal postings. I would say minimally, I would suggest that you keep them for a year. However, as Mark indicated, if you have them electronically, you could keep them longer than that without being buried in paper, and you can just then refer to it as you need it. And if you look on the vacancy notice, the posting that is on the screen, if you notice on the top right-hand corner, there's a date. And so you could always go back and check by date as to when it had been posted, or by position title. Make sure also, as a note, the minimum qualifications, especially if it's a classified position, should be listed on the posting along with a general description of the duties and responsibilities. And the salary, it's usually a range based upon whether or not you're going to get somebody who has limited or no experience, or somebody who may be transferring from another district with more experience. So there's usually a salary range, and that's derived from your collective bargaining agreements.
And just to piggyback a little bit on the qualifications for the custodian's position, say you're doing your job and you have one of those positions open up and they can look over the quals. Just because they're already established doesn't mean they're cast in stone and you're married to them. If you feel that there needs to be some change in qualifications before you go out and post a position, contact your civil service. They will send you a form. They will work with you. They will tell you if they think it will be acceptable or not. And if they're not, and they're not sure, they will pass it along. But again, I stress the importance early on to establish these relationships with your civil service people as well as your bargaining unit presidents. Okay, the next position we have in front of you on the screen is for an unclassified, a teaching position. And this one just happens to be, again, as Becky indicated, you see the posting date when it was posted in the upper right-hand corner. It's a special education teacher in the special education department, the locations, the duties, the qualifications, the salary, the start date, and the closing date. And again, remember, this is you get to choose the best candidate based on the paper you receive in your interview. This is now completely separate from civil service. So you are in control here, and the only thing you have to go on now is your instincts and your references and how the interview goes. You're not tied to the civil service.
And the qualifications are based upon New York State certification.
Okay, Becky.
Oh. Okay, now we come to the recruitment portion of the hiring process, and you get a pool of candidates that have responded to your vacancy notice, whether it's a posting or whether it's an advertisement in the paper. And the first thing that we do as personnel directors is check as we talked about, the qualifications, the minimum qualifications. In the case of an unclassified position, an instructional position, you would need to check to verify that they hold the appropriate certification for the subject area that you're looking to hire, or in the event that it's a teaching assistant, to make sure they have the teaching assistant certification. And we've given you, if you look here, we've given you the website for New York State Education Department, where you can go in and verify an applicant's certification. State Ed has now indicated to us that, I guess as a cost savings measure, I'm not sure why else, they are no longer going to be providing paper copies of certificates. It's all online. So I would not take, not that it makes them bad people, but I would not take anybody's word for the fact that they're appropriately certified. I would go in to the Teach website where you can actually check to see the certification. And if the person is not yet certified, it will even tell you what is missing and what they need to do to complete before they can become certified. We've had situations where people thought that they finished their coursework and the certification was automatic and they didn't even need to apply and just assumed or thought they were certified. Or they had their initial certification and didn't think they needed to apply for their permanent certification and just assumed they were certified. And when we went into the Teach website, we found that they in fact weren't certified. So I would check those. Once you have identified those people that you think or the supervisor thinks are worthy of a first-round interview by the principal or the supervisor, before you bring them into the interviewing process, you go to the Teach website and you verify the certification.
The other things too, Becky, I would mention is that sometimes, we do get applicants from outside of New York State.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the categories in the Teach site too, I believe, is you can also check what they call reciprocity, and those are, what agreements, what is New York State willing to accept from colleges from other states. So if you had someone who, graduated from a school, like say from Louisville, Kentucky, and they were applying, you could go to the Teach and they would tell you if those were the qualifications that would be accepted by New York State.
Yeah, and usually what happens is there are certain people who are authorized representatives who has access to that site. Not everybody can just get on that site. There are generally on the form, there are 3 names that you can offer, and the superintendent needs to approve those people. In our case, it's myself, as the personnel director, and 2 of my personnel aide and the clerical support person in my office. And when I identify the people that we're going to be looking to interview, before I even send them on to the administrator, the principal who's going to be doing the first round of interviews, we check for certification and make sure, in fact, they are certified. When you're talking about the classified side of civil service, as Mark and I mentioned, you need to look at the minimum qualifications. If it's a competitive class position, that's pretty clear because you've got the list of mandated eligibles, and that's the group that you have to work with. If it is non-competitive, however, you need to check the minimum qualifications to make sure that the person that you're looking to to interview would meet the minimum qualifications. And as Mark had said earlier, it's very helpful for you if you can establish a good working relationship with your liaisons at county personnel, because they can be very helpful to you ahead of time to ward off any problems so that you're not down to the, wire and you found the person that you want to hire and then civil service says, well, they don't meet the minimum qualifications. What I have done is if there is someone who the supervisor in the district feels they want to hire, I have asked our liaison to look at the resume, look at their qualifications to let me know ahead of time whether they meet the minimum qualifications and whether they would be approved if we were going to appoint them. So then you know it beforehand, so you don't have to go back to the drawing board after you've already selected an applicant.
And just, backing up to competitive, just because they have taken the test, which you may have found out or will find out in the future, doesn't also mean they're really best suited for the job. You find out that there are professional test takers out there, and they will take every test that comes up. And, I always kind of think sometimes they are sometimes testing for a specific skill set, but they are sometimes generalized. So when you're hiring from the list because you have to, sometimes being naive when I started that, the person was going to be perfect, and then all of a sudden you hire that one person because they were on the list, they took the test, they were one of the reachables, and they really don't know how to do the job. And that's when the paperwork for the records become important during the probationary period to try to remove that individual.
We've also given to you examples, again, from Onondaga County, an example of a job specification that we had talked about earlier. If you notice in the upper right-hand corner, it will tell you what type of position it is, whether it's competitive, non-competitive, or labor class, and it lays out the work activities, the performance, knowledge, and skills and abilities necessary, and the screen, if you look beyond that, I know the screen kind of cut it off, but the last piece of that is the minimum qualifications. And that's important to focus on when you are looking to hire, to make sure that the candidates or the applicants that you're looking to interview meet the minimum qualifications. I would also say to you that when you're developing the minimum, these are the minimums based upon civil service. If you feel there are qualifications beyond what civil service has required for a position that the district wants to hold the candidate to, you can add to those minimum qualifications. For instance, in our district, one of the things that we require of our grounds people is that they possess a commercial driver's license. It's not required based upon the civil service job specifications, but in our case, many of them do snow plowing during the inclement weather, and occasionally they need to drive and utilize the heavy equipment that requires a CDL. So we've added that to the minimum qualifications, and we'll only interview those people who currently hold a CDL. And that's, a district requirement that is not necessarily a civil service requirement. So keep in mind that the civil service requirements are minimums, and they're going to vary too, again, from county to county. So keep that in mind as well. Then we move to the application process. County personnel has a civil service application, P200. If it is a competitive class position, at least the way it works in Onondaga County, is they have to, an applicant has to fill out a P200 in order to be eligible to take the exam. So that happens through civil service. But the other positions are not necessarily required by civil service to fill out that P200. What we do in our district is we have applicants fill out both the civil service application, the P200, and the district application, because in some cases we're looking for somewhat different information. And that application should be kept on file for anybody who applies, and we keep all applications on file and let people know for a minimum of 1 year, because we'll go back to them if positions open, at any time during that school year. So once you get the applications, how do you screen through all the paperwork, and what do you look for in terms of who are the people that stand out for applicants that you're looking to interview? Well, the first thing, obviously, is any relevant experience. Have they worked in the position for which you are hiring in other districts or in other companies, and for how long? If you're looking at length of time in positions and you notice with civil service for the probationary appointment, there's generally, and again, that varies from county to county, but it ranges from a minimum of 8 weeks to a 52-week probationary appointment. So if you're looking at somebody's application or resume and you notice that they've changed jobs within an 8 or a 52-week period from time to time, then that's a red flag to you that maybe they haven't been successful in the position and they've been terminated prior to completing their probation. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the reason to exclude that person absolutely from an interview. If you think their credentials and their skills and experience are something you want to learn more about, but I would certainly question that during the interview process. The same would apply for the teaching, the instructional end of the organization. If it's a 3-year, if you see that somebody's turning over jobs every 1, 2, or prior to getting tenure, then that's a red flag that they have not been successful in securing tenure in another district. So it's certainly something to keep in mind and focus in on when you're screening paperwork. Also, gaps in employment. And, in this economy, it's, a little more difficult for people to secure jobs, so gaps can be explained. But if they've worked for a year or two and then there's a gap of 2 or 3 years with no apparent employment, again, that would be something that is questionable. And if you do decide to interview them, I would certainly question that during the interviewing process. And then looking at their salary history to see just to see whether it's somebody that you would be able to afford to hire, because it may be somebody who's had experience in another district who is interested in coming to your district, and if they have quite a few years of experience and they're making a significant salary, it may be a salary that's beyond what your district can afford to pay. And you don't want to get through the interviewing process. Everybody loves the candidate and wants to hire them, and then you find that, you can't afford to hire them. So these are all things to take into consideration and look at when you're reviewing their paperwork and the application. There's generally a question on the application that whether they've ever been asked to resign a position in lieu of being terminated, or whether they've been denied tenure. That's an important question to check on the application as well. And again, you may not want to dismiss them out of hand, but it's certainly an area that you want to explore during the interviewing process, whether they've been convicted of a crime. And that doesn't mean charged, but whether they actually got a conviction. A charge is just an allegation. And this, too, doesn't mean that they would not qualify to be hired. So you have to be careful on this one, that you don't dismiss somebody just because they received a conviction. There's got to be some link to the conviction and the job duties and responsibilities that the position requires.
Yeah, and I believe, Becky, it was just like within the last year, there was actually a law passed indicating that you cannot discriminate someone against being correct.
Yep. References are important, and I know people get busy, and oftentimes that gets overlooked because it's time-consuming. But not only check the references, but I would also make the phone calls to the supervisors and the references, and also make sure that there's a place on the application process for a sign-off, and that ensures that the information that they're giving you is true and accurate.
One of the things I would add, because you may not be one of the people who are actually doing the reference checks, but one of the questions I always tell people who are doing reference checks for me is, if you think you really nail it down to the person you want, ask the question, would you hire this person again? And if they say no comment or no, that's a good indication not to hire the person. If they hire him anyways, then it's probably not the person that should be doing the hiring for you. But again, that's kind of a nice way to, sum it all up, because, usually people don't tend to give bad references. They might say, well, they were only employed here from such and such a time, or, another thing is, my legal counsel has advised me not to answer any questions on that employee. Again, a good red flag to listen to. There is a question from Concetta, is it? Yeah. If you have to take one of the top 3 candidates, how do you exclude someone from the interview process if they are one of the top 3? I mean, usually what will happen, this will be really quite obvious, is when you interview the 3, just like if you were selecting your own 3 that weren't from a list, you're going to have, obviously, someone who just doesn't interview well, whether it's the interview or they really don't have the understanding even though they passed the test. So obviously, someone will rise to the top as being your as your star, and you would just do what you would normally do, is you just notify the people that thank you for your interest, but we have hired somebody else for the position. And
but the answer to that question is you can't exclude them from the interview process if they say they're interested.
Correct. I think we have another one there.
Yep.
Where should you keep copies of your reference checks notes? With ours, and I don't know about yours, Becky, we have those notes that we keep right on their applications, and then those applications, once they're hired, actually go into their personnel folder.
Yep.
And
you can keep them in the personnel folder, but I would also make sure that when somebody asks to review their personnel file, and I would advise that you have them make an appointment to review the personnel file, and you just pull the confidential references before they go through their file.
And if that ever does happen, make sure you or your secretary or somebody from the office sits there while they go through that file, because there are some people who would maybe insert something that wasn't there or delete something. So you should never just hand over the file to the individual. You should always have somebody there with them.
Recommendation.
Question?
And then you come to making the recommendation, and we're going to try to walk through this a little more quickly because we're getting short on time. But with the appointment process, you want to make a recommendation for an appointment, and we gave you a copy of the BOCES form that indicates who the candidate is you want to recommend for employment. And that gets approved by the Board of Education, and then they're employed with the district.
Okay, the appointment process, the recommendation form. This is not the reference form. This is not the job duty statement form. This is not, do you need the job? This is the actual recommendation form that will be completed by you that will go to usually the personnel office, the business office, and then on to whoever puts the board agenda. And then that form will also be placed in their permanent record folders. And we happen to have here a copy of one used by OCM, and you can see the information that goes on there. It's just standard information. name of the person, address, location, again, the length of employment, is it 10 months, is it 12 months, is it part-time, is it hourly, is it tenure, position of the title, references, and this starts the process now that will get to the board, which will give the official nod that the person now has become an employee. And again, usually this form, at least in our facility, is kept in their personnel record file.
Going back, there's a question back on the interview process about, are there questions that you cannot ask during an interview? And absolutely there are. Anything that has to do with a protected class of employee in terms of it being illegal to discriminate based upon age, gender, marital status, race, religion, those are off limits. And even with respect to a disability, you can't ask directly about a disability, but it is appropriate to ask a candidate if they are able to perform the duties and functions of the job as you describe them. And if they indicate that they can with accommodation, then you have an obligation to meet that accommodation. So I would stay away from any of those questions that could be viewed to be discriminatory. Can't ask them their age, can't ask them if they're married and if they have young kids, and how are you going to do the job if you've got kids at home, because that tends to be more discriminatory to moms and dads, potentially. So, but I would also say, with respect to when you're doing the reference checks, school districts are a pretty close community, and a lot of people know each other in the school district community statewide, and it's a little bit different than it is in the private sector, where a lot of companies have taken the position that all they're going to give you if you call on a reference check is name, rank, and serial number. When we call each other, I know as personnel directors, or we'll call another school district if an employee is applying from another school district or did some subbing in that school district, we know that they are confidential. And as Mark said, the kinds of questions that you ask, whether they received tenure, whether there was any reason that you wouldn't hire them, people are more comfortable talking to each other because you do know each other, and you know that they will be kept confidential. And you should really make sure that that is confidential. I don't even share that information if a principal is making a recommendation on a teacher that they want to hire, and after I've done the reference checks, I say, we're not going to hire this person, and you've just got to trust me on this one. I don't even talk to the principals or anybody about the information that's disclosed to me on a reference check. They just have to trust that, I'm doing the right thing and I've done my homework. And then we go from there. So that's an important part of the process as well.
Okay. One of the things I just want to point out, just a stickler on, is on the bottom, and I don't know if you can see it on the slides in front of you, but on the very bottom part there are sign-offs, and as you, as the business official or, doing the HR function, would sign off, make sure all the other signatures have to be signed before you sign off. Don't leave any of those blank, because you just never know, when the assistant superintendent of administrative services, well, I never agreed to hire that person, and it was blank was there, you signed it, and the person got hired. So just, I sent them back to, the superintendent, I sent them back to assistant superintendents, and it's nothing that's done, maliciously. It's just, it gets, in the process, and it just oversees their signature, and they will actually respect you for, making sure that that signature is there by sending it back. Shows that you have the eye for detail, which is so important in the jobs that you have as business officials. The appointment process. Okay, everything is now done. You've You've had the board appointment, everybody's done their homework, and now the person is in your office or with somebody in your office meeting face-to-face to go over all the conditions of employment, signing all the paperwork. Do they want to be part of the retirement system or not? Are they going to be part of the insurance? Is it going to be family? Is it going to be individual? Are they going to be part of the flex plan? All those host of things that you are also familiar with. Again, those are all documents that need to be kept. Those documents are to be kept in their personnel folder. But the thing on the bottom that we're going to go to next is the employment agreement. This is something that I came up with a couple of years ago, because what I was finding out is, even though I process every application that comes into our BOCES, and I decide based on my review of the application, if that's going to get set on to the department administrator for an interview, because usually I don't get involved in the interviews unless it's a key cabinet position in the organization, is, they meet with, say, someone in my office, and they have the salary and the benefits, and we really never had them sign off on that. And they go on their way, and about 6 months later, they come knocking on my door and say, well, I've been here 6 months. Where's my $1,200 raise, or where's my 2% increase? And I'll say, well, I'm really not sure what you're talking about, because you are part of a collective bargaining group, and that raise kicks in July 1st every year. Unless sometimes there are stipulations that if you are hired, after February of a certain year, that you will not get the raise that happens in June. But anyways, what I found out is supervisors, building administrators, to attract people, they kind of misled them and told them that there may be or could be a pay increase 2-3 months down the road, and they weren't too happy when they came to me, and I said, well, this isn't going to happen. It's not a reality. And so I ended up putting together this little sheet, and they actually sit down with me, nobody else in my office, and it's just to go over everything so they do know their number of days, prorated if they started after the year. They know what the salary is. They know what the benefits are, and I have them sign the bottom. I give them a copy of that, and then a copy again for the records goes in their permanent file. So when they do come down 6 months, 5 months from now, even after they sign this, and they're looking for their raise that their supervisor is talking about, you say, well, remember, on November 23rd, we sat down, and we went over everything, and you signed off that you were agreeable of those terms and conditions, and that ends that conversation right there. But it just eliminates putting you and the employee in an awkward situation and having them have to go back to their immediate supervisor now and be in an awkward situation. You're next, Becky.
Okay. What we do as well is, with all new employees, the personnel aide in my office does a new employee orientation and sits down and goes over all those things that Mark talked about. And I would say we have a checklist that we've included in here for the kinds of things that a new employee would need to be advised of, and you do that through the interviewing process, but once they're actually hired, they need to understand all of the benefits and the entitlements they have, and there's a ton of paperwork. So with the new employee orientation, the personnel aide will have them sign the I-9s and the W-4s and the paperwork for the retirement system. There's also an obligation that employees are notified of the sexual harassment policy and that there's annual training for that. So we would make sure they get a copy of the policy, the TSA information with, a lot of us use Omni Group, any of the benefits, health insurance, dental insurance, any of those benefits and paperwork. The hope would be that at this point in the process they've already been fingerprinted, but you would just check off. That's just another thing. This checklist is for whoever's doing the orientation to check off to make sure that all the mandated requirements have been fulfilled. If they need an ID badge, if They need to get an email address or access to a computer, all those kinds of things. And this checklist is good to have just to make sure that you've hit on everything, especially if you're doing this in June or July or even August and you're trying to get a lot of people in and ready to go with the start of the school year. It can get a little hectic. The fingerprinting requirement, this went into effect back in, 2000, I think, for background checks for any employee who has direct contact with students. When they first put it into effect in '04, there were big cardboard forms, and a police officer or somebody who was trained to roll prints would come in and roll the prints of a new hire, and they would give us their check, and it would have to be mailed to the state ed department, and it took months to hear back from the state ed department. And technically, districts were not authorized to hire anybody until they got the clearance back from state ed, and it could literally take months. And that's why they had the conditional employment process that allowed you to hire somebody before the prints came back. Now they're all done electronically. Many of the BOCES, I think the Oswego BOCES does it, Onondaga BOCES I know does it electronically. They have the machine, and we send all our hires to the BOCES to be fingerprinted and done there. With the instructional side of the organization, there probably should be very few people that would need to be printed, because everybody who is getting certification through the state education department needs to be fingerprinted in order to get the certification. So if they come to you certified and ready to be employed, they should already be fingerprinted. The only thing that you would need to do would be to fill out paperwork that would be sent to the state education department and to OSPRA, indicating that they are being employed by your district. And you'll get documentation back from them saying that this employee is cleared to work for your district. And I would keep that also in the personnel file for the duration of their employment. And what that does is it puts them in the system, and so if at any time subsequent to the fingerprinting an employee should get into any kind of a legal issue and have an arrest, you are notified through OSPRA of that arrest. They're not all that timely sometimes, but you will get that information and then you can follow up on it. So everybody who works directly with students needs to be fingerprinted.
And the one thing I just want to add there is, you had Mrs. Jones, who retired last June,
Right.
who has been there since 1968, and she decides that teaching is her life and she can't retire after the first month. She's got to have that contact, so she wants the sub, and then you tell her that she has to be fingerprinted, and usually she's not too happy, but once that service is broken, and there are individuals out there like myself who haven't had to be fingerprinted, but if I was to ever leave my position with the Oswego County BOCES and go to another BOCES or a district where I would be having contact with students, I would have to go through the fingerprinting process. Just like the individual who retired, who never had to have it done, they want to come back, even though, they were the teacher of the year and who's who in teaching, they still have to go through that fingerprint process.
And you should also check, because I think districts handle it very differently. I think some districts require that the entire cost of the fingerprinting is the responsibility of the applicant or the employee, and other districts may pay for the fingerprinting for all or some of the applicants in the district. Also, when we talk about the classified end of the civil service organization, your non-instructional employees, you have to report any and all personnel changes to civil service. As we talked about earlier, civil service maintains a roster of all the positions in your district, and they keep that and they keep it updated. So anytime you have an employee who leaves the district or changes from one position to another in the district, you need to do a personnel change form, and that's a P100. And it indicates you also, you may have an employee, and this happens often with drivers, bus drivers. They start out in the district as a sub, and then from that you have a probationary appointment, and they are appointed from a sub position to a probationary appointment. When that occurs, you must fill out a P100 and notify civil service to take them off the roster from being a sub and putting them on as a probationary employee. So anytime there's a change, you need to fill out those P100s.
Okay, annual notification. And that's really as simple as it sounds, is annual notification. And there are some really good reasons to do this. And usually we do this in the early fall, late summer. And if you, on the next slide, what you will see is it has the employee's name. Again, are they full-time, are they part-time, and what is their salary. And this is important because obviously in all of your own districts you have the opportunity for staff of they're working on their master's degree or they have their master's degree and they're still taking courses. There's usually parts of the bargaining unit that allow for salary adjustments, and obviously there are mechanisms for that you go throughout the year for documenting those and adjusting the salary. But one of the important things of the annual notice is that when you send that out to the employee and you have their salary out there, and obviously in this particular one we didn't put any numbers in there, the employee will look at that and they can say, gee, I took 4 courses last year. I believe my salary, is $1,500 short. And one, hopefully you never have to catch that, but hopefully you're right on top of that. But you don't want to go 2 and 3 years and all of a sudden have pay someone $4,000 or $5,000. So you want to make sure that you do the annual salary notice every year. And also what we include on there is their number of sick and vacation days that they have available to them, which would be the beginning of the year. One of the things that we just moved to, and some of you people may be doing this as well, is we use WinCap, and on our pay stubs every pay period, it also indicates on there their balances. But this notice right here is, like I said, usually something we send out first part of September, end of August. It comes back signed that they've acknowledged and verifying that the salary, the balances for sick days and personal days and vacation days, if the group has it, signs off that they agree. And again, that goes in the personnel folder. That stays with them.
Going back to the fingerprinting piece, we had a question about a teacher who retires and then comes back right away to sub. Do they need to be fingerprinted? And the answer is if there is no break in service, they're not required to be fingerprinted. But if there's even 1 day of a break in service, I believe, then they would need to be fingerprinted. Sarita had a question about RPC through merit, and we're looking for clarification because I'm not sure of the question. So we'll try to answer that with clarification. And then, are there any rules or regs that speak to the inclusion of benefit information on the salary notice?
Perfectly honest with you, Becky, I don't know. That's just something, that's just been in place ever since I've been there, but I don't know if it's a legal requirement.
Yeah, I don't believe it's a legal requirement. Generally, it is controlled by the collective bargaining agreement. It tells you what benefits someone is entitled to, and that's really the the authority for the benefits. But when we do the new employee orientation, the personnel aide in my office goes through all the benefits that an employee is eligible for, and she maintains records because she's responsible for all the benefits, and she maintains the records for each employee on the health insurance, the dental insurance, and the vision, and those records need to be kept up to date because oftentimes an employee, when they're hired by us, they're single and they take individual insurance, and then they get married and they put their spouse on their insurance, and then they have children and they add their children. So there are a lot of changes that get made to that health insurance information, and so she maintains those in a separate file of medical records.
Going back to Sarita's question, she says, what does the RPC stand for? What that stands for is Report of Personnel Change. And as Becky, claimed, that sometimes people stay with you, but they may go from a teaching aide or an assistant to a clerk or a senior typist. They may go from a bus monitor to a bus driver. But when that is a change, even if it's still within the system, that report this form has to be filled out. I'm looking for the merit, and I don't see where she's referring to merit, but RPC stands for Report of Personnel Change.
Oh, okay. That's from the Oswego County site. Okay.
So maybe if we get some more clarification on the merit, we can address that, because we certainly want to answer your questions for you.
And Christopher, with respect to benefits, it's not mandatory to collect marriage certificates and birth certificates, but I think it absolutely is a very good idea, and it is important because especially unless your benefits allow you to provide a health insurance benefit to a significant other that may not be in a marriage situation, you could be providing those benefits without that. So now what we do is we request the marriage certificates or a birth certificate, or in the case of an adoption, we ask for the paperwork for adoptions, and we do verify the dependents. And the birth certificates will also help you with the dependents to verify when the dependents age out in terms of still being eligible for the health insurance. So all those records are maintained in our files with respect to the benefits. It's a good question.
Okay, we have another question. Actually, we're very fortunate today. Besides the 33 people that are out there, we actually have a live person in our audience today, and she just handed me very eloquently 2 questions going back to the RPC, the reported personnel change. And she says, do they make a check mark or their initials when the items are completed? And for our county, it is just a check mark. And then the next question is, does someone do a final review of the checklist to ensure everything is completed? And yes, that person is me. I have a clerical person that maintains all the changes and the paperwork up to date for civil service. But before it is sent on to the civil service office, I review everything, and then my signature goes on there. So if it's filled out wrong, then it becomes my responsibility, not the person who checked it off. Because once my signature is on there, I have verified that the information is correct. But that form could vary. Maybe some agencies, other than our county, want initials, but ours is a check mark with my signature, excuse me, on the bottom. Two good questions.
And Sarita confirmed that Merit is the online system that they use for Albany County Civil Service. And I would say absolutely that meets that requirement. If you make any changes online, and I would assume that you have a way of maintaining those records as well, just in the event that there is any question based upon your records and civil service records.
I'm glad she brought up the online, because actually about a year ago, just a side note, I attended a meeting with our civil service office up in Oswego, and they're actually thinking about going paperless, going to an online system where this, all these forms that we've shown you today, at least from Oswego County, would be electronic at some point in time. So hopefully that'll be soon. Again, going green and eliminating the paper, but obviously still needing to maintain the records. The next thing that I wanted to talk about after annual notification was the notification of reasonable assurance. One of the things, that we have for our 10-month employees, which are typically teaching assistants and teachers, but we do have, being a BOCES, we are a lead agency for some grant programs, and some of those people that are in the grant programs, they might be 11-month employees. So what we have to do is we send them a letter from me, which is the next slide, which indicates that, basically, once September rolls around, they'll be reemployed again by the Oswego County BOCES. And the whole purpose of doing this is to prevent them from getting unemployment. They're not being laid off. Their position is either 10 months or 11 months, and therefore, if it falls into the appropriate calendar year, they would not be eligible for unemployment. And again, this is something that will go in their personnel form. I don't know what you use at ESM, Becky, if you want to elaborate on that.
Nope, we use the same form, and we generally do, though, have a sign-off and ask them to send it back so we maintain it in the files that they have been sent for reasonable assurance. And as Mark says, then we are not liable for unemployment insurance over the summer because they have reasonable insurance of ongoing employment the next school year.
And now there are some times, though, when things do change and you do have to lay off some people, and, sometimes someone will come to you, well, I signed and you signed this letter of reasonable assurance, so, how dare you lay me off? Well, one, we eliminated the program, so if there's no students, it's kind of hard to have you there. But just because they sign, this letter of reasonable assurance, sometimes there just are financial and budgetary situations that arise over July and August where the person, would be laid off, and then they would be eligible for unemployment. And then sometimes the question comes up, well, gee, I should be then eligible for unemployment back for July and August. It all depends when the layoff date is. If the layoff date is going to be September 1st or August 31st, then no, usually you don't have to go back. Sometimes if there is a massive layoff due to a program change, you may have to go back, at a board meeting and actually do the layoff effective, say, June 30th. And then you would be entitled to pay the unemployment insurance for July and August. That's just a little side note that we had to deal with in our agency this summer, that, those things do creep up just because you have these neat little systems and forms for the record keeping. There's always sometimes something that does challenge that, and you have to do the research and make sure you do the right thing, both for the employee and the organization.
And that would apply to substitute teachers. We've gotten that question, as well as any 10-month substitute teacher aides, teaching assistants, any substitute employees as well. Because as long as you send them a letter of reasonable assurance and they're still interested in continuing to sub the next year, if they voluntarily ask to be removed from the sub list, then they're not eligible for unemployment. But if you take them off the sub list for whatever reason, because, oftentimes you'll get a call from a school that says, don't send sub to our building again because it didn't work out. If you take them off the sub list, then they will be eligible for unemployment. So if you want to continue them, you send them a letter of reasonable assurance, and then they will not be entitled to collect unemployment over the summer.
Okay. Along with annual notifications is the wall, and I'm sure everybody in their district office has seen the wall. This is where these nice glossy posters are put up. They do have to be displayed in a place where people can see them, and they cover things such as the federal minimum wage, family medical leave, and you should make sure that they're updated. There are these companies out there that will send you these emails and say, there's a $10,000 a day fine if you don't order your poster from us, and chances are you do have that poster, but you do just have to make sure that these posters are in a clear, easy, visible place for your employees to see, and to make sure that they're updated. If you have the minimum wage, back from 1968 on your wall, then chances are you're in violation. Now, I've never seen the wall police in all my years in the system come out and look for this, but to be safe, make sure that you have your wall up and current.
So now we go on to leaves. School districts are probably the most generous employer when it comes to leaves of absence, in my opinion. There is sick leave, and there is personal leave, and there is unpaid leave, and there is child-rearing leave, and there is maternity leave, and the list just goes on and on and on. FMLA is the Family Medical Leave Act, and that was really a federal law that was put into place, I think, for the private sector, where the leave opportunities are not as generous as they are in the public sector. For instance, in a lot of private sector organizations, if a woman beyond the disability period, pregnancy-related disability, the expectation is you return to work or you don't have a job. A lot of collective bargaining agreements in school districts give people up to a year and sometimes 2 years for child-rearing leave beyond the disability period. So our leaves, I think, are very generous, but we fall under the federal requirements for family medical leave, and so we have an obligation to provide it, and the record keeping is important for FMLA for several reasons. The advantage that the public employees have to FMLA is that generally, if you go on an unpaid leave of absence in a school district for a significant period of time, and in our district, if you're unpaid for a month or longer, you are obligated to pay 100% of your health insurance premium to keep any of your benefits, to keep your benefits intact. As long as you are on the payroll, you still pay only the employee portion of your benefits. But if you're unpaid, you have to pay it at 100% to keep it. Under the federal regulations for family and medical leave, if you're on an unpaid leave of absence, you are only obligated to pay your employee share of the premium while on your FML to maintain your health insurance. And so that's a significant cost to employees. That family medical leave is for a 12-week period in any given year, and can be concurrent or it can be intermittent, and it is to those employees who work 1,250 hours or more in a given year. That's why it's important to have a form relative to family medical leave, so you can track to verify that an employee doesn't, first of all, get more than 12 weeks in any given year, and also that they are eligible for the FML to begin with, in that they did work 1,250 hours in the year that they are requesting, in the year prior to the leave. Teachers who are only 10 months or 10-month employees, teachers, teaching assistants, would all be eligible because the law indicates that they are assumed to have worked the requisite number of hours. The leave is available to employees for the birth or adoption of a child, for medical leave to care for a spouse, a child, or a parent, medical leave of their own serious health condition, or medical leave. Most recently, the law has been amended for medical leave to care for a member of the military, a covered service member with either a serious illness or injury, or if you need to manage the affairs of a service member who's in active duty. You can take family and medical leave for those purposes. It is our obligation as a district to notify the employee that they are their FML is being utilized, and you need to be tracking that. It is difficult when it's intermittent leave. Say you have an employee whose spouse has cancer and they need to take intermittent leave from time to time because the spouse is undergoing chemotherapy. There's got to be a way of tracking that to ensure that the employee does not exceed the 12 weeks under FML. Now, clearly there are other medical leaves that they're entitled to, but for purposes of the federal law, you've got to be tracking it, and they need to be notified that they are using their family and medical leave for these purposes. We have provided you a sample form to help you track these, and these too should be kept. Ideally, you should have a separate file for medical records for your employees so that they are more confidential and they're not kept with the personnel files and there should be very limited personnel who should have access to employee medical files. So it's probably a good idea to keep these in the medical files so that there is some confidentiality. And as it indicates, there are the list of the reasons for the medical leave, and there should be a start and an end date if they know the end date for the medical leave, and you need to be tracking that on a regular basis. There also is a recent law for leaves of absence for cancer screening, and that entitles an employee to use up to 4 hours a year to have their routine screenings for breast cancer or prostate cancer or any type of cancer screenings or the routine mammograms, and the employee is not required to use their sick or personal time to go and have these screenings. So again, in order to ensure that the employees don't exceed the 4-hour maximum per year, what happened to the chat?
I got the two. I remember the last two, so I'm
Okay.
hanging on.
We lost the chat questions, but I think we have two that we'll
There's one on reasonable
attempt to
assurance,
address.
blood, so
There we go.
there we go.
So we've given you examples of two, the one form that an employee would fill out, which is a request to for the leave for the screening, and it gives the dates and times that they're going to be gone from work, approximate because it hasn't happened yet, and where they're going to be going for the screening, and the employee signs off on that, and then it's approved or denied by the supervisor. We also have an additional form that the employee needs to take with them to the medical center where they have the screening done, and the agency signs off that in fact they came to the appointment, they verify the actual hours that they were there, and it's not because we don't trust our employees, but we do just want to have the documentation and the record. So in the event that they've exceeded the 4 hours and they need to go for another screening, they can certainly do that. We're not going to preclude them from getting the medical attention that they need, but at that point in time, after they've exceeded the 4 hours, they would be using their sick and or personal time for the additional time that they need.
And there was a court ruling, I believe, in the last couple of years.
Trust but verify.
Yes, the question was raised, can a male staff employee go for a breast cancer screening? And the answer is yes, because lately there has been some findings of men developing breast cancer. So I was waiting for that question to come up, but yes, men would have to be included in that. One of the other questions that popped up, Becky, says, isn't there also time to give blood? I'm just trying to think back. I can't remember if I received a field memo from the civil service that they can use, part of that 4 hours to donate blood as well.
Right.
And to go back up to Donna, we do not, at our school, BOCES, give reassurance letters for summer school teachers, teacher assistants, or anybody that we hire during the summer in maintenance. I don't know if they could be eligible for unemployment. I receive the unemployment reports throughout the year, and I check them over to see who's on there, and I do not recall anybody from summer school ever putting in for unemployment, but maybe, Becky, you have some information?
No, we haven't done it either, but I guess I would say to you, when in doubt, I would send it. Generally, our collective bargaining agreement has a process for hiring summer school teachers, and that's the authority that we use for hiring summer school teachers. So I think that may preclude us from having any obligation for unemployment if they don't get hired during the next summer school. But I guess it wouldn't hurt to send them the letter anyway, just to be on the safe side. And field maintenance, usually our maintenance staff are 12-month employees. The other people that we have for assistance with maintenance, we use summer student workers, and they're just hired on a temporary basis, and we do not send them letters of reasonable assurance. Yeah, you did get the question, leave to give blood. Yeah. The answer is yes. Yep. We also gave you a copy of the leave request forms. As I said, we are very generous in the types of leave requests, leave opportunities that school district employees have, and it's important to track these for a number of reasons. And if you look on this request form, you'll see all the various leaves that employees are entitled to. Personal business, and you'll see here on this one, it specifies a reason. It depends on the district. Some districts require a reason for personal leave. Some collective bargaining agreements say that, no reason need be given. It's personal business and you don't need to supply a reason. But there's sick leave, family illness, bereavement, religious, and there's a whole host of leaves. The reason that it's important to track these is, first of all, you want to make sure that people aren't exceeding their sick leave allocation. It carries over from year to year, and if you're not tracking it, then you don't know when they've exhausted their sick leave time and would need to go on an unpaid leave of absence. The same would apply for personal leave. You want to track vacation time for the same reason, to make sure they're not taking more vacation time than they're entitled to, and it's tracked. Now with a lot of times too, all these leaves will be electronically tracked, but what we do is we track them on our leave request forms. We track the attendance, and then it goes, all that information is put into Finance Manager, who prints out our paychecks, and they track the leaves. So every paycheck, our employees will see the number of sick days they have allocated and the number of personal leave days they have left. And then with the first paycheck in July, they are given their new allocation of whatever number of sick and personal days they're entitled to for the start of the school year. And then that continues to roll and is tracked in Finance Manager. So that's the way that we track it in addition to the leave request forms. But it also requires the employee to fill it out, and it indicates whether it's with pay or without pay. And the importance of tracking unpaid leaves of absence is pretty significant, because it can impact, for new hires, an employee's tenure date and probationary appointment. So as long as an employee is in a paid status, that is considered time toward meeting their tenure or meeting their probationary appointment. The time that they serve without pay is not credited toward tenure or probation. So you can then extend the probationary appointment for any time served on an unpaid leave of absence. So it's important for you to track it for that purpose. It also will impact seniority. So if you're involved with a layoff situation and you're looking at who is the most senior, you may clearly have a teacher, for instance, who was hired before another employee but was on an unpaid leave of absence for a period of time for, say, child-rearing purposes, and when they returned, they don't lose their seniority for the time they earned before they went on the unpaid leave of absence, but they don't continue to accrue seniority. So when they come back to you after being on an unpaid leave of absence for a year or two, they may, in fact, be less senior now than the person who was hired a year after them, because the unpaid leave of absence puts them behind the employee that was hired after. So it's important for calculating seniority to track those unpaid leaves of absence. And in this economy where districts are being faced with layoffs, that's going to be really significant, because determining seniority is a huge task. And so if you're tracking this all along, it helps you in figuring out who's the more senior employee. So we touched on the seniority and the probationary period. And again, even with civil service, if your non-instructional employees are on any kind of unpaid time, you can only extend the probationary period based upon the unpaid time that the employee served.
And one point I just want to make, Becky, when you were talking about layoffs in civil service, sometimes you will come into a situation where the people were appointed at the same board meeting, or they are on an addendum, and usually there's no correct, well, I shouldn't say there's not, there are correct ways of doing it. There is no one correct way to determine who goes when you have more than one person hired in the same evening for the same tenure title, as long as you're consistent. But the point I'm making is, if it's someone who is civil service, you have to contact your civil service office, because the method that they use to determine who gets laid off when you have someone appointed at the same night with the same title may be different than what you use for unclassified people, and you have to follow their.
Right.
And again, they maintain that record, so you need to contact them.
And that's the good thing about civil service. Once you keep the records up for the non-instructional side of the organization, they will track the seniority for you, and they'll actually let you know. Now, there may be a discrepancy in with your record and theirs, and then I would pursue that. But they give you that information, whereas with the instructional side of the organization, state ed doesn't do that. You've got to go back within the tenure area and review the appointment dates and any periods of unpaid leave of absence to determine the seniority of your staff.
Okay, the end of the line. Just when you thought that you had all your paperwork completed, at the front of the line, when you were hiring people, there is the same amount of paperwork that has to be done when you reach the end of the line, whether that is for retirement, termination, or layoff. And I just have some bulleted items here that I would like to touch upon for this. Again, civil service, if you have someone, again, who is leaving, there is the P100 forms, again, that you have to fill out. This time, instead of, checking that maybe they went from one department to another or from a typist to a senior typist, you would be checking the box, either retirement, layoff, or termination. And again, that would need to be filed with civil service. The TEACH system. When a person who was entered into the TEACH system leaves your organization, you need to notify the TEACH system. And again, as Becky indicated earlier, there's usually 3 people in each district that have access to the TEACH system, and usually those people are the superintendent or the secretary to the superintendent, the athletic director, and obviously the human resources office. Somebody will have to go in there and go to the correct area in the TEACH and indicate why that individual is left.
And the reason for that, remember, as we said earlier, with the fingerprinting requirement, employees are cleared to work for your district, not another district. So they're on record as being employed with you. If one of my employees leaves my district and goes to teach in Mark's district, I need to notify through the TEACH website that they're no longer employed with us. And then when in Mark's hiring process, when he hires that person, he goes in to teach and he gets clearance for them. He gets the authorization for them to be cleared through their fingerprinting to work for him. So there's a paper trail. And again, in the event that the employee runs into any legal issues after they've been in the system, state ed needs to then knows who to notify about the arrest or the issue.
Okay. And unfortunately, all of us now are becoming too familiar with layoffs, but notice of layoff. What you have to do here is the first thing you need to do is you need to check again with your collective bargaining unit contracts to see if there are any stipulations in there for the number of days of layoff. I know that a lot of people think that it's a state law under the Fair Labor Law that you have to give everybody a 30-day notice. But when you go onto the Department of Labor website, there really is no magic number of days that are in there unless that's something that's been negotiated with the local bargaining unit. I know out of the 6 bargaining units that we have at our place, there are 2 in there that specifically say, in lieu of a layoff, you have to give the employee a 30-day notice. But again, you like to get anywhere from 2 weeks to 30 days on your end, and you I always like to kind of reciprocate the same way. But again, the bargaining unit may dictate that, so make sure you do that. Final salary calculations. Obviously, there are some units that have payouts for sick days if it's a retirement. There are some bargaining units that have vacation days. Obviously, teachers and teacher assistants do. But when a person is leaving for the purpose of retirement, you're going to have to do final salary calculations. usually due to some type of payout for unused sick leave. This is always something that is done usually in the Human Resource Office, and then that is sent to the employee and also the business office, so that the employee knows how much they're going to receive and the business office knows how much to give that person. The same thing if you have an employee who is leaving, not due to retirement, because say they're taking a job in another district and they have some unused vacation days, you may be obligated to pay them for their unused vacation days if they haven't used yet. And again, so those things need to be tracked, they need to be kept, so if you're ever questioning an audit, you can refer back to the proper paperwork in your records to justify why that's being done, and you don't be accused of giving away public funds, something that you want to be very careful with. The exit interview, if we have a copy of, I guess we did. The exit interview, I don't say it's a mandatory thing, it's probably a good thing to do. I try to do as many as possible. Obviously, if we are terminating a person because they embezzled some money or that was a physical abuse with a teacher, probably not going to have an exit interview because you kind of know why they're leaving. It probably is not really a good time to sit down and ask some questions like that. But what I like to glean from them is when we do them, there's a couple of things. Sometimes this is also part of the exit interview is where like you would collect all stuff such as keys, communication devices that the employee has, such as also like their ID badge, and then, being the HR office or the business office, you would be the repository for those at the exit interview, and then you would then disseminate them, to O&M or wherever the technology, wherever the devices needed to go. But the reason why I like the exit interview is sometimes, we always hear in personnel, I'm sure you always hear in business, that everything we do is wrong and we're out against the employee. And when you have an exit interview, it's usually very reassuring and refreshing, that the individual's telling you, the benefits were great, the working conditions were good. It kind of reaffirms that what you're doing is the right thing. But also, and I haven't run across this lately, but there could be some things that, the district does need to improve upon, and you might not be aware of it until a next interview. It doesn't mean that's the reason why the person is leaving, but it's usually a question that is asked. And, if it's just one individual, you file that away in the back of your mind because maybe it was just a pet peeve with them. But if you happen to have, half a dozen, and there's no magic number on exit interviews, and that same question, that concern keeps reoccurring of something that you could do better, then maybe it's time that you use that as some data to review some of the things that you're doing as it relates to benefits or policies. And I do not personally keep those in the personnel folder. I keep these in a separate folder in my office, and I always tell the person that when I leave, whatever exit interviews that I have in my file at that time will be shredded. Enron probably should have paid attention to that. But because I tell them that it's between me and them, or them and I, the information they give me, unless it's something that I feel that we would need to share at a cabinet level that would be for our organization to better ourselves. Because I don't want them to feel that, they're afraid to say something. Because they that may be a time that you do find out something about a immediate supervisor that you were unaware of, and it's something that you may want to address, and you may have to. So there's just a lot of good things that can come out of the next interview. It doesn't always have to be negative.
It may also help you if you're responsible for doing the negotiations or the collective bargaining with one of your units. If you see that people are leaving to go to another district because the salary's better, you get an indication that maybe your district, you're not competitive with respect to salary or benefits. And if you're looking to try to get the hiring rate up or improve the benefits to attract the best candidates to a position, and you've got to go into a board of education and get that authority, if you have those statistics to say, over the course of this year, we lost X number of teachers to neighboring districts because, and they've advised me it's because they had got a higher salary or the benefits, they got a better health insurance benefit or whatever, you can use that as the justification for why you need to do something in the next round of bargaining to keep the district competitive. So that information is useful.
And finally, on this slide here is COBRA. Obviously, when somebody is laid off from employment, their insurance will be terminated, usually at the time of unemployment. And due to laws and regulations, the individual is entitled to COBRA. And if you are self-funded, usually your third-party administrator will send the appropriate paperwork out to the individual to sign up for COBRA. I believe it's 18 months for the employee and 36 months for the dependents, Becky?
I think so.
However, it is very costly. Some of you people may be, have family plans where, your premium share may be the equivalent to like, $800 a year for the family plan, where on COBRA, a family plan could cost you as much as $700 to $800 a month. But it is something that is out there for the employee that you do have to offer when they are laid off.
And that web address gives you, it's a model notice, COBRA notice that you can, use reference if you don't have a letter that you normally send out, and you can, rather than reinventing the wheel, you can tweak that one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next. Records retention. Obviously, this is what this whole presentation was about, and hopefully it was helpful. But, I'm sure many of you want to know the specifics, like how many years, how many months, how, as long as the person's employed, after the person, but how long do these records have to be kept? If you go to the website that is up here, the WW Archives, New York State Ag Government, you can see it up there. There is probably about a 200-page document, and buried kind of in the middle of that document, around page 66, there's about 11 pages that specifically spell out how long you have to keep each one of the forms that we have talked about and others that we haven't talked about in your district. So, the night that you can't sleep, grab a cup of coffee, go online. Don't print out the whole document as I did a few weeks ago. Scan through it and be familiar with that, and that should really give the specific time frames that you are looking for, probably for all the burning questions that you have on timelines that you wanted to ask but didn't ask today. And finally, we're at the point of questions. Our live person here, as we speak, is handing me with very eloquent handwriting. Who is responsible for keeping the records under the civil service section? School districts or county?
Which records?
There's a lot of different kinds, and are some of them actually civil service? Like, would the county actually be keeping them instead of the school district?
Yes.
Yes.
They are the official records keeper, and again, this is why you're always sending them the various forms. And again, maybe just because I'm in a relatively small county, usually once a year, they will send us their records with everything from length of employment, salary, leaves of absence, and we compare that against our records to see if there's any discrepancies. Right. And sometimes there is. There's discrepancies at their end, there's discrepancies on our end, and that's okay as long as we can come and make it right. But I've always been told, and I'm sure Becky can verify, as far as civil service, they are the official keeper of the records of a civil
What
service.
county are you in?
Onondaga.
Oh, okay. Yep, they should have them.
Thank you.
And you will also periodically get you have to update the roster to make sure that it's accurate, and you'll notice on the roster they will have put on the roster any changes that you've submitted to them through the P100 over the course of the year. But additionally, if you choose, say, not to fill a position, if you don't actually go in, at least with Onondaga County, this is the case, if you don't actually do a resolution to abolish a position, it will stay on the roster and just show that it's vacant. And sometimes that's a good thing to do, because you may decide you're not going to fill it now, but if things get a little better, or depending on if enrollment increases, you may need to fill it, then way, you don't have to create another position and do that paperwork again because you already have it on the roster, and it saves you time and energy that way.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to turn this back over to Matt to see if he has any questions from his end from the phone. Matt, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I've got no questions here. There are a couple in the chat. I don't know if you've addressed them yet.
Yes, I believe we are, Matt. We are up to date on everything right up through Patricia with blood. Yeah, we've been keeping right up to those right through the presentation.
Okay. Oh, well, other than that, if anyone has any questions about the presentation, please begin typing them now. I'll give you about 30 seconds, and if there are no other questions after that, we'll be done for the day.
Do you have any music to pipe in during the silence?
I have no music, no.
Yeah, just one thing, I would say to the people that are out there with the civil service is, many times, we're quick to say, that the civil service, are our enemies, are the root of all of our problems. And I can see the good and the bad for civil service. But, again, it doesn't hurt, once a year, I get a couple dozen donuts, and it's usually, in the middle of the winter, and I go up to the civil service, and I just sit down, we have some questions, is there anything we need to talk about? And you would be just surprised the relations that you can have with the civil service and how they can really make your job easy at times.
Okay, we actually have Christopher Pearl wants to know if you can please repeat the answer to the OSPRA 101.
OSPRA with respect to fingerprint. Repeat the answer to the question with respect to fingerprinting, Matt?
He wrote here, can you please repeat the answer to the OSPRA 101?
Okay, let's see.
If we go back here, he says, regarding the OSPRA 101, are we still required to have people fill out these forms with the live scan?
Yeah, do you have a form that yes.
Yeah, and usually you can go online to your BOCES and do all the paperwork ahead of time, so when you actually come to it happens to be regional certification office in our BOCES, where you do the live scan, you can do everything online, with your credit card and everything, so when you get there, the person will go online, check that everything is complete, and you just do your fingerprinting right there.
Okay. We have no other questions, so that'll do it for us today. Thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and we hope you all have a wonderful holiday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This conference has not started or